Hello, everyone. My name is Vivian Owia, and I'm the host of the Feminist Sparc podcast, where we discuss everything feminism and its practice in Africa. We are so excited to be partnering with the revolutionary Swaiba podcast for 16 Days of Activism under the theme Unite to End Gender-Based Violence.
And I'm Nyambura Mundiga, the host of Swaiba podcast. We are a podcast that features audible African women like one we have today. As Vivian said, we are very excited to be doing this two-part series around the SGBV, 16 Days of Activism and Ending SGBV. And our second guest is the newest audible African woman in the Senate, Miss Asige. Crystal, asante sana for coming.
Thank you so much for joining, Crystal.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, if you could introduce yourself briefly.
Yeah, sure. My name is Senator Crystal Asige. I am representing persons with disabilities in the 13th Parliament, 4th Senate. And apart from that, people also know me as a musician, singer, songwriter, activist, advocacy in disability matters and disability mainstreaming. But I'm also a practitioner in inclusive mobility and transport for persons with disabilities. But you really for all, because universal design is actually for every single person.
Thank you, Crystal. We are so happy to have you as part of this conversation. First of all, congratulations on getting nominated to the Senate. Can you tell us how that is like for you? What are you looking forward to?
I'm just really looking forward to helping people. Politics, I'm not the best politician, but I'm really a good person when it comes to people. And I think that's what any legislator should be based on their thoughts, their work, what they're trying to do for Kenya. It's about people at the end of the day, isn't it? And so what I am hoping to get done is to serve all Kenyans, but especially those who I have been put here to focus on, that's persons with disabilities and women with disabilities as well. I'm also the first senator to be a youth and a woman and a PWD. So a couple of barriers at least have been broken just by me sitting here. So I'm hoping
you're representatives of progress.
So I'm hoping that I will be the first of many, basically. Yeah.
Congratulations on being the first of many. And I mean, when we were mentioning that the barriers that you have, crossed or helped, just shake off the glass. I'm thinking about, how do we, because the topic is SGBV and ending SGBV. I think the question is, how do we, as a people, conceive or understand SGBV that makes it very removed from the rest of legislation or our daily lives in politics, or actually normalizes this in our personal spaces, but also our very public spaces like political spaces?
I think culture might have a little bit to do with it.
Yeah.
I also think that culture that has been given to us has also got a little bit to do with it. I think there's a fine line or a balance. Mm-hmm. So my thought is there are some things that we were given, right, by the West when they came over here. Mm-hmm. That is language, that is ideals, religion, and so on and so forth. And what they gave us was not really to help us. It was more to keep us in line. And so if fast forward to 2022, our culture is now a little bit, or I feel very intertwined with what we were given. And so there's blurry lines between what is ours and what do we agree with as a people in terms of GBV and what is unacceptable, and then what has been given to us to believe is unacceptable. So I think those two things need to be separated, so that we can also, as a continent, as a people in Africa, be like, okay, this is what is correct. This is ours. Si ati tumepatiwa by other movements and stuff like that out there.
Yeah, because I feel like a lot is lost before we just figure ourselves out in terms of, is this our culture? Is this Western? Mm-hmm. And before we know it, I mean, women and girls are facing SGBV and our lives are being lost. Mm-hmm. And we're still lost in discourse.
Yeah. Let me just pick up on that. Let's talk a little about intersectionality, right? We navigate life through different identities. We navigate life through different sexualities, through different axes of power. Can you talk about how women and girls with disabilities actually experience sexual and gender-based violence? How is that like? And what are other movements not seeing as regarding ending gender-based violence?
Okay, so studies show that young women and girls who are Black and living in Africa are the most discriminated because we have multiple burdens of of issues.
Yeah.
And those stats also show that we are 4 times more likely to suffer GBV. Me, right here, I'm a representative of women that are 4 times more likely. And we are always at the bottom of all totem poles. All stats that you see or hear of, it's like white men, black men, white women, black women, correct. Men with disability, then women with disabilities are like at the bottom. So that's no different in SGBV. And another thing that we need to also really start focusing on is not just IPV, partner violence. Yes, it's also a violence and a violation of our rights from our caregivers, our parents, our communities, our laws. They don't really protect us holistically. Of course, they've been made a long time ago, number one, and also, like I said, by people who perhaps were not African, or not in our context. You know, they were given to us, some of these laws. And so they do continue to leave us behind. Women with disabilities are going through, like, I was going to use another word, but I'll use a more polite word. They're going through a lot. From our hospitals in terms of, for example, being given menstrual suppressants so that we don't get a period because we are thought to be not ready to see our period, or not able to handle a period, or be clean or be hygienic. And so families then opt, especially because of poverty, then opt to just go to the hospital and have a medical care attendant, give us menstrual suppressants, or there's forced sterilization as well. That's rampant in our community across Africa. South Africa really have reported a lot of that, like a lot, against women with disabilities. So, again, assuming that we cannot take care of another human being, of course not because I've got a disability, right? I can't take care of another child or another human being, or look out for them, or protect them, provide for them. So we are forced into sterilization, and those are both cutting type and also, medication. So that's something that we are not really talking about in terms of SGBV, and we're forgetting about women with disabilities. So, I mean, devoteeism as well.
What is that?
So a devotee is somebody who is specifically attracted to a person with a disability. Like they find this like a fetish, exactly. So they find looking at somebody with a physical disability, for example, like attractive. The way they're struggling, the way that like it makes them feel like I can save that person. It's a real crazy mishmash of a psychology. It's all of it. So they are specifically attracted to people with disabilities, and so they look like they're approaching us from a point of care and concern and real genuine love. But it's actually because I've got this fetish for the way you're struggling, the way your body is deformed, or the way maybe you're a little bit slower than another person.
That is mind-blowing in the wrongest way.
Right. So then IPV then plays a part as well there, because there are devotees in this world. And that's a real thing. And I don't really see people talking about that, apart from me in my small spaces. But that's something that needs to also be amplified, absolutely.
But when you talk about devoteeism, is that word? I'm almost lost for words. Because then it looks like as we were speaking earlier when we were getting ready for this, is there's a whole conversation around whether it's SGBV, but also what feminism can do for women and girls, but also other vulnerable groups. But it looks like there's a particular, when we talk about disability, we almost don't get there. We also do not have the frameworks, because the large part of it is we don't understand the issues. But away from education is also, there's a conversation you had, there's something you mentioned around, legislation, in terms of how it's almost a double-edged sword, where it puts women and people with disabilities at further risk.
So there are some laws here in Kenya as well, but Africa-wide, that assume, or rather, they're under the guise of we're trying to help. We're doing this because it's in the best interest of this woman or this girl with a disability. For example, if there is a woman with a disability who's raped or sexually abused, they will, instead of figuring out who the perpetrator is and putting them away or putting them to justice, what they do instead is put the woman through forced sterilization and say, you know what, already she has a disability and now she's been sexually abused. And so now what we're doing is to help her so that she doesn't have to have another human being to take care of because of this circumstance. So
that's in essence taking agency.
Exactly. Absolutely. It's how can you remove my womb instead of looking for the person who performed this heinous act on me. You're punishing me. And so women with disabilities are then left like 3 times discriminated because we're women, we have a disability, and now we can't even have children, which is a lot of the time the pinnacle for African women. They feel very proud to be able to, to give birth.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely a lesser woman as a woman with disability in that situation.
And then what I'm hearing is that for persons with disabilities, their experiences, their lived realities have not really made it to the front line, right? Have not really been mainstreamed. Do you think it's because, say, the activism space or the systemic environment that we live in has ensured that persons with disabilities remain subjugated, for instance? Or do you feel that even the feminist movement that says, they try to be intersectional, do you think that the feminist movement, for instance, is very fragmented in the ways that it organizes? What do you think is the problem?
Yes, I think that the feminist movement, as powerful as it is and as much as it's been able to achieve in a very short time, has left women with disabilities behind. Because first it was women that were in the forefront, and then now youth and women are, sort of like, side by side, but then women with disabilities are so far back we can't even see them.
Yeah.
And we have loads of nuances to our problems. It's not just a two-third gender rule, that we're fighting for. We're fighting for layers and layers and layers beneath that as well. And unfortunately, I'm not sure what the reason is. I'm not sure it's systemic. I just think it's a matter of when you're so focused on what you believe in, you then forget to be inclusive of everyone around you. So whether it's for the better or the worse, that's our mentality as human beings. We're so focused and we want to surge forward with what we believe in, but then we're not looking to the left and right to think like who's missing here. Correct. You always have to ask, and I always say everywhere I go, when you're in a room or when you're making a decision, you ask yourself, who isn't in this room? Who are we missing? Is this place accessible? Is what we're doing accessible to every single person? Is it inclusive? Like those kinds of questions have to be considered.
So, Crystal, what does accessibility actually look like? What are we talking about when we say accessibility?
We're talking about access, like for all. Okay, so let my ability access everything. Accessibility, whatever my ability may or may not be, I should be able to access everything. I should be able to access healthcare as a woman with disabilities. I should be able to access mental health and well-being facilities as a woman with disability. I should be able to access, yes, absolutely. Why should I go into a facility or a clinic and be looked at as if, what are you doing here, madam? Oh, I'm looking for a family planning consultation. Really? You? Yes, me. I want to have children. I want to have many children. We also want to live the full width and the breadth of life.
Yes.
And those kinds of questions.
So the system does not really view you as a sovereign person with
as a
autonomy
human
and agency,
being.
as a human being.
Correct. Yeah. And just for human beings, our fellow people in Africa, especially because we are sort of, there's a cancer in terms of our ideology and our thinking, our mentality, in with regards to freedoms and rights and justice for all, right? Some of us still think that men are, et cetera. But what I'm trying to say is that access should be for everyone, even in terms of our language, even our languages, our dialects. When you talk about a person with disability, you're actually insulting them. Kipofu, instead of just saying visually impaired.
Okay.
You understand? So it's those kinds of things. When I say access and I say universal design, I mean all of that. It's encompassed in that. And access as well means our facilities and everyone around us also need to be in the same journey, be in the same fight. They need to have a buy-in, because it's not something about that I should just be doing all the time, being an activist in everything I do. And when that happens, then and it meets moments of sexual liberation and sexual expression, that's when men feel that, this person is not really a human being, so I can do what I feel like with them.
You have to be put in line.
Correct, yeah.
And that's where there's almost an okaying of violence.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then the issue of, for example, sensory disabilities, like mine is a sensory disability. Women who are deaf have a sensory disability. A woman who is deaf and is undergoing IPV or SGBV, she cannot like scream out, and that's been taken advantage of, because if you're prelingual, for example. Prelingual means that you became deaf before at a very young age. You've never really heard sound before, and so that means that you can't speak it. And so when you're being attacked, when you're being abused, you cannot actually communicate to another person. And because we're not all, like I said, we're forgetting women with disabilities or disabilities in general, then the public are like, what is this person trying to say? She's touching her private parts and she's, she's crying. What's happening? Like,
I would imagine they would be dismissed.
Absolutely. And women with visual disability like myself, right. If I'm going through sexual abuse, I cannot actually just like walk out. I cannot like run. Yes. Where am I going? You understand? So these things are being very much taken advantage of by men.
And what about your experiences on digital platforms as a senator? That is making communication on digital platforms. How is that like for you?
I think it's going very well because I have been in the public domain for some time now. There are already people who have seen me and they understand what I'm sort of fighting for and my vision and things like that. Yeah. And there are some who are now starting to see me more than they used to see me because, unfortunately, apparently women cannot be more than one thing. You can't be a musician and an activist and a businesswoman.
You have to say why you...
Why do you think that you should be more than one thing? So now that people are seeing that I'm more than one thing, I think they are definitely supporting what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to achieve in the digital space. I'm using a lot of creative arts to pass my message along. I think it's a beautiful thing. For example, Bob Marley that did it, he used his music to pass on his message of his political messaging and, peace and universal like love for all. So I think that's one thing that I'm advantaged in right now in the position that I'm at. And it's all sort of coming together. And I feel like it's actually just the beginning of it's just like no one has yet to see what I'm hoping to achieve. Yeah.
Crystal, just having this conversation with you makes me feel what you said earlier. it's almost that this the conversation around SGBV preparedness, whether it was an election, has been hard. But we have I say we because as a practitioner in gender, but also a feminist, we've missed parts of huge parts of vulnerable women who are actually experiencing SGBV, perhaps in more severe ways that we can imagine. And thank you so much for your patience in terms of just shedding light, but also educating us. I feel like, this should have not been a podcast. It should have been a workshop so that we just sit in. But I think my question is, understanding the legal frameworks of Kenya, but also the cultural frameworks, what is working within the country now that could perhaps be improved to be more inclusive so that we're working from a positive integer as we go into really inclusive, because I think we are very far from being inclusive. Yeah.
What would it take to unite to end gender-based violence?
Okay, that's a huge question for one person.
I hear
you. But I think definitely steps that could be taken is ensuring that all laws across the board have an element of universal sort of approach to it. Yeah, absolutely. It needs to every bill should consider people with disabilities because we are the biggest minority group on the globe, and anyone can join. Even today, after we leave this set, the next time I see you, things could have changed, touch wood, it doesn't, of course. But I'm just saying that because we're such a humongous group of people, the very large part of the population, every single law should have universal access to be considered, whether it's roads, whether it's healthcare, education, whether it's agriculture. There needs to be thought that is put around even climate change, disability inclusive climate justice. How about that? That's what I'm talking about next as well. This is what I'm on right now. So, because everything will affect us double, triple that it affects
in a very specific way. Yeah.
Yes.
I think for me, I want to say inclusive or inclusive climate justice. I will tell you the truth. I mean, even when people write concept notes, they're not thinking about disability. They're thinking about rural women, urban women. Humongous way of describing people. But I think when we say people are not homogeneous or women are not homogeneous, we actually need to say what you said earlier. Who is missing in the room? I do not have anything else. Otherwise, we would make this podcast as long. It's because I feel like all of us need to come and learn. And thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you so much for joining into the conversation and for telling us that we need to remember who is not in the room and ask that very critical question as we organize.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm really glad for you guys to be putting these kinds of spaces together so that conversations that are not had are had. We shouldn't just be doing the same generic thing. We're in 2022 going into the next year. I mean, let's be future facing, let's be forward thinking, and let's innovate, even in our conversations. Let's be innovative and spark the imagination and the creativity of people who are listening. So I'm really appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you.
As Vivian and I have listened to you, there's no way we could let you go because without asking, where do we get this information? Where do we find you? Are there resources? Please let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as Kenyans, as Africans, we can start becoming a little bit more interested in politics, and not just when it comes to election year, but throughout the years. So I would encourage your listeners to log on to Senate proceedings, which is on YouTube, or National Assembly proceedings, and see what your elected and nominated leaders are saying on your behalf, and put us to task and keep us accountable. But also on my social medias, you can also follow what I'm doing on my Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. It's just Crystal Asige.
Crystal, asante sana. I'll pick it up from where you ended. That governance and is beyond election processes. So even for SGBV, it's beyond 16 days of activism. And I think, Vivian, we have covered that in the first episode of this 2-part series, where Njeri told us that, for her, the dailiness of fighting SGBV is every day. So I think to say that multi-stakeholder approaches, conversations, but also playing our parts as stakeholders, however that is. Thank you very much for listening to us. Thank you very much, Crystal, for coming. Please subscribe, share, and remember, the theme for this year is Unite.